You remember what you saw for 30 years. You saw Pakistani flags. You saw black flags in Kashmir on August 15th. You saw even ISIS flags in Kashmir. I have been trained to go out in the most dangerous circumstances as a journalist. I am the first woman entrepreneur, startup owner as a woman in digital media. This is my story. This is Jammu and Kashmir story. I want you, since you all are preparing for civil services, I want you to understand that you may have good intentions, that you may be the do-gooders, you may want to do the right thing because you are ultimately going to be the protectors of human rights, but you have to understand whose human rights are you protecting. The nation has to decide, are we going to let the enemy win by inducing this fear in our minds? As I don't forgive the people who were responsible for my exodus, who were responsible for the ethnic cleansing of my community, I refuse to forgive them. We are one nation, never forget this. We are one people, never forget this. Anyone telling you that this community, that community is enemy is telling you the untruth. You are the future of this nation. You will decide the direction in which we will enter the next century. And I believe that this century and the next and all the centuries ahead belong to India.
Namaste everyone.
Namaste and good evening to everyone. It is with a great pleasure that we extend a warm, heartfelt welcome to this extraordinary session on Kashmir before and after. We gather today to extend our heartfelt welcome to a luminary in the world of journalism, Mrs. Aarti Tikoo ma'am. Founder and editor of The New Indian, who is going to share with us her life story. But before we begin our program, every program at Chanakya begins with our Upasana. Therefore, I request everyone to please sit up straight in your position, with your spine erect, pay attention to the words and also to your breath. Let me briefly introduce our chief guest for the day. Mrs. Aarti Tikoo ma'am is the founder and editor-in-chief of The New Indian. Ma'am was born in Anantnag district of Jammu and Kashmir to a Kashmiri Pandit family. After the exodus of the Kashmiri Hindus from the valley in the early 1990s, she moved to Jammu with her family. She has studied in the University of Jammu and also done her master's in international affairs from New York's Columbia University. Her entire career has been spent in Delhi, where she currently resides. Aarti Tikoo ma'am's insightful coverage of the Kashmir conflict, Pakistan's cross-border terrorism, and the complex tapestry of global geopolitics has truly set her apart. Her efforts have been nothing short of exceptional. Her remarkable journey has garnered recognition, earning her the esteemed Times Aspire Award and also the prestigious Wiscombe Fellowship, which stands for Women in Security, Conflict Management and Peace. I request Avinash Dharmadhikari sir, himself an IAS officer and founder director of Chanakya Mandal Pariwar, to please welcome Aarti Tikoo ma'am.
This is Shivaji Maharaj.
Oh.
Now I request Aarti Tikoo ma'am to please share her thoughts about the land of Rishi Kashyap with our audience.
Namaskar everyone. Let me begin with a thank you to Dharmadhikari ji. A thank you to Chanakya Mandal Pariwar. It's quite exhilarating for me to address the future executive, the future decision makers of India today here at Chanakya Mandal Pariwar. Especially because I'm standing in the land of Chhatrapati Shivaji and the Peshwas, and it's such an honor and also in a way a huge contribution for the nation building when Chanakya Mandal Pariwar is continuing with the tradition of the Chhatrapati Shivaji, the Peshwas, of creating the intellectual capital of India. So thank you once again. Now let me come to the topic. Kashmir before and after. The time period, if you noticed, for Kashmir before and after has not been specified. It's not been mentioned by Dharmadhikari ji for reasons best known to him, but I think the reason should be obvious for all of you. The reason is that in the last 75 years, since independence, there's been only one particular date which brought paradigm shift in Kashmir's history ever since we got independence. And that particular date is August 5th, 2019. And you all know the significance of that date. That's the date when the Modi government reorganized the state of Jammu and Kashmir and nullified Article 370 and Article 35A of the Indian Constitution. When I say that this particular date is the paradigm shift in Kashmir's history, what do I mean by that? What's the significance of Article 370 or 35A that I am attributing so much significance to this? Before I explain that to you, you must understand the principle on which India was founded. When I say India, I mean the Republic of India. The Republic of India was founded on the principles of equality and liberty and fraternity. These three words you might have read, I'm sure you must have read, in the preamble of the Indian Constitution. Now, we all were raised, all of you studied this in your civic books, in your school, in your college. On Independence Day, on Republic Day, we often go back to these three words. The significance of these three words we take quite for granted often. We don't really pay attention to what it means to have liberty, to have equality, to have fraternity. But if you were in Jammu and Kashmir, and if you were a thinking person, you would often wonder whether these three words were relevant or were implemented in Jammu and Kashmir when the Republic was founded. Because Article 370 and 35A, which were inducted in the Indian Constitution in 1950 when we became a republic, were a complete contradiction to these three values of the Indian Constitution. 370 and 35A, from whichever angle you look at, did not reflect these ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. In fact, what these two articles actually exuded were the opposite of liberty, the opposite of equality, the opposite of fraternity. In other words, Article 370, I have been for a very long time saying that Article 370 and 35A facilitated the idea of Pakistan in the Free Republic of India. Many of you may find it baffling, but I'll explain why 370 and 35A were not just contradictory to the fundamentals of the Indian Constitution, but were also facilitating the idea of Pakistan. Article 370 made Jammu and Kashmir a special status state in the Union of India. When you give special status to somebody, you automatically encourage or inculcate the idea of discrimination. This particular student is special. That particular student is not special. While the rest of India was equal, while the rest of India treated all its citizens equal, Article 370 and 35A did not treat everyone equal and did not see each one of us as special. In fact, what it did was the fact that Pakistan was created on the basis of two-nation theory. Do you all know what two-nation theory is? Yes? Is there anyone who does not understand two-nation theory here? No hands. So I'm assuming you all know. So when Pakistan was founded, was created on the basis of two-nation theory, we basically accepted that Hindus and Muslims cannot coexist. We accepted the Muslim League's idea that Muslims deserve a separate state under a Muslim dispensation. But India, on the other hand, the republic that we founded in 1950, disagreed with this idea. We said that we all are equal in the eyes of the law. We said that everyone will have equal rights, that everyone will have the freedom that our founding fathers or founding mothers granted to us. Two-nation theory was founded on the idea that Muslim majority areas will go to Pakistan. And Jammu and Kashmir, which was a Muslim majority state in 1947 and continues to be a Muslim majority union territory today. However, because of 370 and 35A, accepted when the Indian Constitution granted its special status, accepted that since Jammu and Kashmir is a Muslim majority state, they ought to be special, which meant that it was in contradiction with the larger idea of the Indian Republic. Do you all understand what I am trying to say? So, apart from this idea, the special status idea, what did 35A do? 35A went ahead further. 35A disbarred citizens of India from having any rights in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Whereas the citizens of Jammu and Kashmir, the state subjects of Jammu and Kashmir, had enjoyed all kinds of privileges, all kinds of rights in the rest of India. Anybody could move from Jammu and Kashmir, receive education in Delhi, settle down in Bangalore, have a voting right in Calcutta. But the reverse was not true. A citizen from Bangalore or from Nagpur or from Pune could not enjoy any of the fundamental rights that were granted to people of Jammu and Kashmir. Additionally, 35A also disqualified women like me if we married outside the state of Jammu and Kashmir to a non-state subject. So, my cousins who married, in fact, in the early 80s or 90s, for example, female cousin married Marathi man, therefore she would immediately get disqualified as a state subject, which meant she was disinherited. She could not inherit the property of her parents or ancestors. She did not have the voting rights. She did not have any of the fundamental rights in J&K. This was not limited to just women who married outside. There were other people also, other communities also who were deprived of the fundamental rights. There were Dalits, for example, in Jammu, who were not even considered to be humans by this law. There were West Pakistan refugees who had migrated to Jammu in 1947 during the partition violence. They did not have these fundamental rights either. So with these injustices and this discrimination against several sections of society, Jammu and Kashmir was allowed to fester as an epitome of injustice and discrimination and the idea of liberalism. And this went on, whichever governments came and went, whether it was the Congress government, whether it was later the coalition era, this went on and on and on till 2019, August 5th. But apart from this, these are tangible discriminations that you understand. What was not tangible was how the idea of communal hatred, the communal bigotry, the idea of separatism was facilitated by Article 370 and 35A. After Jammu and Kashmir became a part of the Indian Union in 1947. Most of you probably would know that in 1947, India and Pakistan went to war with each other over Jammu and Kashmir. And a part of Jammu and Kashmir was occupied by Pakistan. Later, Pakistan gave some part of that occupied Jammu and Kashmir to China, which still remains under the Chinese occupation. Now, with this historical background, in 1947, the Congress government under Nehru's leadership in a way handed over the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which used to be a princely state before 1947, was headed by the Dogra dynasty. The last Dogra ruler in Jammu and Kashmir was Maharaja Hari Singh. And when Jammu and Kashmir became a part, Nehru, because of his own alliance with his own friendship with Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah, he handed over the charge of Jammu and Kashmir to Sheikh Abdullah, claiming him as the most popular leader of Jammu and Kashmir. There was no attestation of this fact, but this is what we were repeatedly told, that Sheikh Abdullah was the most popular leader because he had, before 1947, led a rebellion against the Dogra ruler Maharaja Hari Singh. With this historical background, Sheikh Abdullah became the first, you can say, Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. But within a few years of accession of Jammu and Kashmir with the Union of India, Sheikh Abdullah turned, or you can say he revealed his communal disposition, and he began to hobnob with the British and the Americans. Nehru put him in jail in 1953. The day after he was arrested, a plebiscite front, an organization which was led by Sheikh Abdullah's men, led a movement for the right to self-determination in Jammu and Kashmir. The idea of separatism was sown in 1953 when Sheikh Abdullah was arrested by Nehru. Since then, just think about it. 1950 we became a republic. 1953 Nehru puts Sheikh Abdullah in jail, and there onwards we have this consistent movement for the right to self-determination, which eventually catapults into what we later called terrorism and became militancy in 1987. So there is a continual history of separatism which is facilitated by 370 because Sheikh Abdullah's heir, Farooq Abdullah, who was Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, consistently demanded throughout National Conference, the party that they represent, consistently demanded autonomy of Jammu and Kashmir pre-1953, which meant that Jammu and Kashmir was supposed to be an autonomous entity within the Union of India. And that's why I say 370 encouraged and inculcated the idea of separatism in Kashmir. Plebiscite Front, eventually JKLF, Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, which is today a banned terrorist organization, was, you can say, evolution of the idea of the Plebiscite Front. As things moved in Delhi and across the world, many of you would not actually believe that India was also a victim, or you can say an object in the Cold War between the United States of America and the Soviet Union. In fact, nobody teaches us this history. We all talk about Cold War with respect to the rest of the world. We talk about the Iron Curtain, we talk about Southeast Asia, we talk about Afghanistan, we talk about so many other countries when it comes to Cold War. We talk about South Korea, North Korea, Vietnam. But we never talk about the impact or the effect of the Cold War on India. I am narrating this history, this geopolitical scenario to you so that tomorrow when you are in the decision making places, that you don't forget history, you don't forget the several multiple dimensions of the conflicts or the problems that India has had faced in the last 75 years and might face even in the future. Our boundaries, our borders are geographical. They are in many ways natural boundaries, because if you look at the map of India, you see the Himalayas, then you see down south, you see the coast. And if you don't keep that map in your mind, you would assume, like many of the bureaucrats in the last 35 years, who were brainwashed to the extent that they would say that let's give Jammu and Kashmir to Pakistan. I want you to know this, that bureaucracy, you may think that they take the oath on the Constitution of India, they go by the laws and the rules of the land, but often because of the lack of understanding of history, because of the lack of understanding of geography, do not take the right decisions, do not negotiate for the right terms when they deal with the rest of the world. So you have to understand the dimension of geopolitics of Kashmir to understand Kashmir before and after. So what is this geopolitical dimension? Jammu and Kashmir, even as I said that in 1947 we have had this history, we had a war in 47, in 65 we had another war with Pakistan, in 1971 we had another one. And while this period, if you have read world history a little bit, you would know that post World War II, the world entered into a Cold War with the US-led bloc and the Soviet Union-led bloc. And India, even as a signatory to the non-aligned movement, was seen as an ally of the Soviet Union. In 1980s, after the assassination of Indira Gandhi, something dramatic happened in Kashmir. People don't understand it, people don't want to accept it, people don't have even the memory of it. Before 1990, when the major disruption happened, terror erupted in Jammu and Kashmir, there was a consistent pattern of events which any student of history, any student of political science or politics, if they would have paid attention, we would not have had the ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits in Kashmir. We would not have had lost the narrative war on Kashmir for 35 years. We would not have had to answer to the bogey of human rights violations for the last 35 years if we had paid attention in the 1980s in Kashmir. What was happening in Kashmir in the 1980s? You will have to also understand what was happening outside Kashmir in the 1980s. And what was happening in the hinterland, when I say hinterland, in the rest of India. India was economically poor. If you all remember, we were in the license Raj of the Indira period. We were also, before that, we were notoriously known as the Hindu rate of growth nation. And by 1990, we had a major economic crisis, a balance of payment crisis, and India had to eventually go to the IMF for funds. We did not have money. So, with this on the one side, on the other hand, in the rest of the world, Soviet Union was slowly crumbling, and the United States, through several interventions and through encouraging or propping forces which were inimical or which were anti-Soviet Union, they were able to gain or control much of the world through the 80s. In Afghanistan, they propped up Taliban, which eventually became Al-Qaeda, if you all remember. And in Pakistan, which was economically doing better than India, they sought the help of Ziaul Haq, who was a military dictator. And Ziaul Haq diverted some of the funds which the CIA had given to Ziaul Haq to prop up Taliban, to force to evict Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. So Ziaul Haq diverted some of the funds to Kashmir, because Kashmir, remember, since 1947 was a bone of contention between India and Pakistan, because Pakistan believed in the two-nation theory, and by two-nation theory principle, since Jammu and Kashmir was a Muslim majority state, Pakistan believed that Jammu and Kashmir should have gone to Pakistan. With their obsession, Pakistan army diverted funds, set up terror camps in Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. They trained many of the Kashmiri, you can say, early militants. In the late 80s, they were trained and later sent back to Kashmir. And this is the period when India is economically weak, Soviet Union is crumbling, US is gaining greater control in the region. What is military industrial complex? America, since World War II, in fact, has been known as a war economy. In fact, even World War I, since World War I has been known as a war economy. Why? In 1931, America faced Great Depression. It's a very complex subject, economy, finance, how depressions happen, how recessions happen, how economies collapse. I will not go into that, but I'll give you the broader picture of how conflicts arise and how conflicts sustain, and how Jammu and Kashmir became part of the larger military industrial complex led by the US. So, why is it known as a war economy? Because there's a concept, there's a theory that wars can turn around collapsing economies. If you are suddenly, you enter into a war with a major country or countries, you are pushing your people to go to factories, to industries, to produce more and more arms and weapons. Because of that cycle of economic activity, you are able to rejuvenate your economy. You are able to generate value, economic value. So, America after World War II became the biggest exporter of arms and ammunition to the world. It still is. Now, these arms and ammunitions are required for what? They are required for war. And if there are no wars, who is going to buy these arms and weapons? Nobody. Right? So, if you study world history from 1945 onwards, after the World War II, you'll see America engaged in military conflicts around the world, whether it was Middle East, whether it was Vietnam, whether it was Korea, whether it was Africa. All these conflicts help the complex which is invested in manufacturing of arms and weapons. There is a complex, there is, you can say, a big network of industries which produce arms and weapons, and they find benefit, they find it lucrative only if there are conflicts, if there are countries and nations which are insecure, which feel that they could enter into a war, and for their own protection they would like to see more conflicts in the world. Therefore, if you go back to Afghanistan, to Soviet Union, to the disintegration of Soviet Union, when Taliban actually emerges as the victorious party in the conflict in Afghanistan, you will understand how Pakistan also used that opportunity to send arms and ammunition to Kashmir, because Kashmir, to begin with, was fertile because of Sheikh Abdullah's separatism, because of Article 370, because of Article 35A. It was a fertile ground for conflict. And also, on top of that, Islamism, the idea that Muslims ought to be under the Muslim dispensation, that Muslims cannot be under a secular dispensation. They can't be governed by a secular system, because if you look at most of the Islamic republics, they are governed by Sharia. So this also, in a way, was a factor which became instrumental in turning Kashmir into a major cauldron of the world. If you've understood the geopolitics of it, if you've understood the internal political dimension of Kashmir, you would wonder, why was Article 370 and 35A there? Because it was constantly feeding the notion of Islamist separatism. It was constantly feeding the idea that Jammu and Kashmir still has the option to accede with Pakistan, that Jammu and Kashmir still had the option of becoming part of the greater Ummah or the idea of Caliphate. You would wonder why was it there? But I think our freedom fighters, our founding fathers, including Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, could foresee it. They knew the geopolitics of the world. They understood how the world functions. And that's why Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, from the very beginning, when Article 370 and 35A were granted to Jammu and Kashmir, from the very beginning, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee was opposed to this idea. That's why he gave the slogan, "One nation, one flag, one constitution." But because of these two articles, Jammu and Kashmir had its own constitution, had its own flag, and considered itself as a separate nation within a nation. Now, coming to 1990, what happened in 1990? And why I say that 370A and 35A actually ended the tragedy that unfolded in the last 35 years because of our decision makers, because of our bureaucracy, because of our leadership. In 1990, Islamist terrorism broke out in Kashmir. They targeted Kashmiri Hindus, of course, and wiped out the entire indigenous communities, culturally, economically, physically. 300,000 Kashmiri Hindus became refugees in their own country overnight. But they also targeted every Kashmiri Muslim who stood up for India. Every Kashmiri Muslim who disagreed with the idea of Azadi from India. They targeted every Kashmiri Muslim who disagreed with violence that was being perpetrated by jihadi groups and the separatist groups like JKLF, like Hizbul Mujahideen, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba. But in the last 30 years, what did you hear? What did you read about Kashmir? You read only one thing. India is the oppressor. India is the illegal occupier in Jammu and Kashmir. You heard human rights groups saying that Indian soldiers are massacring people of Jammu and Kashmir. You heard that Indian security forces are raping women in Kashmir. This is the only narrative you heard in the Indian mainstream media. This is the only narrative that you heard in the foreign media as well. So what was happening? What was happening in Delhi? Is Delhi media anti-national? Are you saying that Indian bureaucracy was anti-national? Are we saying that Indian leadership was traitorous to its own nation? These are big questions, and I want you to think about these questions. I'm not going to answer, but I'll just give you the description of what was happening. The Indian leadership post 1990 incentivized separatism, they incentivized terrorism, they actually facilitated separatism in many ways, because as I told you, please try to connect the dots. Military industrial complex. There are many people who benefit from conflicts. We call them conflict entrepreneurs. People who earn money, who earn their livelihood by selling arms and ammunition. People who earn money when you have Islamist terrorist groups. In fact, I don't know how many of you have studied other conflict zones, whether you studied Palestine, for example, Palestinian conflict, or you've studied Syria, you studied Sudan. If you look at all the conflicts in the world, you will notice that conflict zones may be lucrative for the military industrial complex, but the conflict zone itself becomes impoverished, their economies collapse, their people of course die, and there is a massive collateral damage in other spheres as well. But in Kashmir, in 30 years, what happened was actually described by a journalist in New York Times. You can check the archives yourself and you'll find out it was such a stark contradiction when she compared Kashmir to other conflicts in the world. So she writes in that article, she comes to Kashmir around early 2000s, and she writes that Kashmir is unlike Jaffna. Kashmir is unlike Gaza Strip or West Bank. Kashmir is very different from other conflicts because Kashmir is prosperous. Kashmir is wealthy. Everybody has a mansion in Kashmir. This is what she writes in that article. And she wonders, she in fact alludes to this, that it looks like Kashmir may have become a perfect conflict zone for military industrial complex. So, in the last 30 years till 2019, and a separate industry was running. This was, as I said, conflict industry. It was helping many vested interests. It was helping people in the system, outside the system. It was helping India, Pakistan at a certain level. Now, this is very baffling. How can it help when you have people dying, when you have an entire community which has been ethnically cleansed? How can it help when you have people blowing themselves up? You have stone pelters, you have rioters, you have children on the streets clashing with security forces. It helped a certain section. Which section? A section that benefited from this conflict. Now, how does it help? So you have a conflict, you will see many agencies and many organizations entering into conflict zone. For example, a human rights violations bogey. Hundreds of human rights violation or human rights watch groups entered Kashmir. And then they would showcase all these incidents of human rights violations, a child who's been killed in a fake encounter, a woman who is been raped. So they would go around the world, they would get funds from Ford Foundation, they would get funds from many other organizations. But these are all tertiary groups. In the end, this is all linked to that complex which is at the top, which is earning money. So human rights violation is one section of it. Then there are many people who went on junkets. For a very long time, it was considered to the prime objective in a journalist's career. If you get a junket in Switzerland, if you get a junket in Germany, a junket in the US, you considered yourself to be the most honorable journalist in the world. You sought Pulitzers, you sought many prizes which are quite cherished by a lot of people. We all look up to these awards because we don't understand how these awards come into being, how these awards are formulated. So for many, going to the US or going to Europe was the primary motive in their careers. So this was another industry. They also benefited. So why would they write anything against the conflict? In fact, all they wrote was oppression by India. They never called out Pakistan. They never called out Islamist terrorism. They never called out the weapons industry. I don't want you to leave this hall with the idea that it was only one. It's multiple agencies who feed on each other. So all these several vested interests, and then there are people within the system. I want to mention it here. I met a bureaucrat who had served in the Home Ministry for several years. He's retired for several years now. And he bragged to me. He said, I'm the only bureaucrat in India who brought human rights awareness to India. That's my contribution. And I said, okay, how did you do that? He said he went to all the Western countries for all these scholarships and fellowships. He brought all these human rights groups to India and he took them to Kashmir. So he felt that he had done a great thing for India. Why am I mentioning this? Because I want you, since you all are preparing for civil services, I want you to understand that you may have good intentions, that you may be the do-gooders, you may want to do the right thing because you are ultimately going to be the protectors of human rights. But you have to understand, whose human rights are you protecting? Are you protecting the human rights of terrorists? Are you protecting the human rights of ordinary citizens who are the collateral damage because of this conflict? Or are you protecting the human interests, human rights of the vested interests? So this discernment, this distinction is necessary. On the face of it, things will look good to you. On the face of it, you may want to follow this path, but you have to think several times before you take the decision. Similarly, many bureaucrats who were either ignorant or did not understand the history of Jammu and Kashmir, did not understand the historical ties of Kashmir with Bharatvarsh. When Indian Republic did not even exist in the way we understand it, that Kashmir is the fountainhead of Indian civilization, that Kashmir has given us culture, that Kashmir has given us literature, it has given us wisdom, whether it is Panini, who gave the Sanskrit grammar to India, whether it was Abhinav Gupta, who gave the Shaivist philosophy to India, connecting Kashmir to South India, or whether it were the hundreds of saints and sages through the times of Mahabharata and later. It's a one single continuum. But when you don't understand this, when you don't understand that this territory has a moral sanctity, a historical sanctity, you will foolishly accept the narrative that is being set elsewhere. That's why I've heard many bureaucrats say that we don't have the legitimate right over Kashmir because Kashmir is Muslim majority. This is the thinking that had penetrated into the system for 30 years. This is what bureaucrats used to say. And it was baffling to me as a journalist, as a student of political science and history, that our own bureaucracy did not understand it. Our bureaucrats, on the other hand, would say that National Conference has a legitimate grievance against Delhi. We took away their autonomy. This is another argument many bureaucrats gave, that we took away their autonomy when Nehru put Sheikh Abdullah in jail and Article 370 was slowly, you can say, defanged, because many of the central laws were extended to Jammu and Kashmir from 1953 onwards. And yet, despite the erosion of Article 370, even in its weakest form was highly illiberal and highly discriminatory. So, why I am emphasizing on this is because while you're studying history today, you're getting prepared for civil services today, tomorrow you might be sitting in that hot seat and you may get confused because you might be surrounded by vested interests. and you may not know what the right path is. Apart from this, some bureaucrats also became part or beneficiaries of the conflict industry. Many police personnel in Jammu and Kashmir would go out and kill, for example, this whole human rights violation. When I talk about it, we think that no, because we don't want to be victims of our own propaganda. Don't believe when people say that there was no human rights violation. There was. But who was doing the human rights violation? A police personnel would go and kill somebody in fake encounter. And in return, he would get a promotion. And when I say 370-35A and this whole conflict industry facilitated terrorism, how? So when they would kill an innocent person in a fake encounter, they would get rewarded by the system, they would get a promotion, and they would on top of that would also get financial benefits. So it became a very vicious cycle. This should not repeat in other parts of India. That's why I am telling you the stark truth. Many people might say that, no, we did nothing wrong. We did many things wrong. So, when such circuitous system evolved, it was almost impossible to break it. But there was, I think, one man in this country who decided to take the bull by its horns. And that was Prime Minister Narendra Modi on August 5th, 2019. He decided that no, we had to put an end to it, end to this vicious cycle. It's not been easy. When you have internal enemies, when you have subversive elements who were part of this whole conflict industry, they would be the biggest impediments in breaking this cycle. They continue to be the biggest impediments. I want to add one more dimension here, which many of you would not understand or know. So post World War II, nation states or states emerged. Most of the countries became part of the United Nations. But most of us don't realize that there is something bigger than the United Nations. There's something bigger than the state or the nation state. What is that? Can anyone answer? Okay, civilization. That's a very positive answer. I wanted to bring you face to face with the darkest aspect of human species or human civilization. There is state, there is nation state, there is civilizational state, and then there is super state. What is super state? Does anyone know? Super state is the concept that post World War II, most of the countries set up their own intelligence agencies. Intelligence agencies function covertly, as most of you would know. What is an intelligence agency? Intelligence agency is a spy agency. In India, we have an internal spy agency and we have an external spy agency. So, most of the countries, in fact all countries, have their own spy agencies. But with economic liberalization and with the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the world became unipolar. Agreed? Now, when the world became unipolar, which meant that United States of America is the biggest superpower in the world, and they obviously would have the biggest spy agency in the world. Yes? With a mammoth agency and with the operations that I was describing earlier, which is also connected to military-industrial complex, two conflicts, this mammoth agency was able to infiltrate through the world through its assets, through its agents. Who's an agent? Anyone can be an agent. I can be an agent. You can be an agent. Anybody can be an agent of any agency, or you can be an agent of your nation. Now, with agents across the world, they figured out the weaknesses, the fault lines of each nation, every nation. And with economic liberalization in most of the democratic world, when I say economic liberalization, what do we mean by that? As I told you earlier, we had a balance of payment crisis in 1990. We had to go to IMF, we had to seek funds and loans, and we opened up our economy. We entered into international trade with the Western Bloc, which we were sort of quite restricted till the disintegration of Soviet Union. Now, when that happened, it brought prosperity, it brought economic growth across the world, across the economically liberalized world. India has grown. We all see that we have grown in the last 30 years, undoubtedly. There's no doubt about that. And economic liberalization per se is not wrong. We all believe in competition. We all believe in the idea that there should be free trade, that there should be no prohibition on free trade. But while this was happening, many other things were also happening. That many of the vested interests through the when I say super state, I mean to say each state which became powerful economically, its intelligence agencies also became powerful. They also benefited as everybody else did. Our schools, our educational institutions, our lower middle classes, our poor classes, everyone benefited through that economic liberalization. But when intelligence agencies became powerful, and these five big, let's say five big, UNSC, you all know, United Nations Security Council, the five big powers of the world, their security agencies and their spy agencies, together with the military-industrial conflict, they saw how the world was unipolar, and they also saw how the world was benefiting from the policies of this unipolar world, or the world led by the US. A super state emerged because of the collaboration of all these entities: security agencies, security establishment, intelligence agencies, military-industrial complex, many other. Now, in fact, in the last few years, we now are aware that there's a pharma complex also, ever since the coronavirus pandemic. So this super state, in a way, controlled most of the world and most of the decision making, most of the policy making of the world. Why I want you to understand or keep this in mind, that there is a super state. Because super state, since the disintegration of the Soviet Union till, in fact, recently, has overwhelming power to interfere in democratic world. Overwhelming power. When you see protests or riots going on in France, when you see revolutions, Orange Revolution or any other revolution in democratic world, assume that there is a large network of funding going on into those riots and protests. Nothing is really autonomous. Nothing is happening spontaneously. There are many collaborators, many forces, many entities which work directly under this super state, which is bigger than the state. You may think that we are electing our representatives, our parliament, our parliamentarians, our legislators, they are voicing our opinions. They are the real karta dhartas of our nation. But there's something bigger than that. That's why I said super state. Keep that in mind. That it's not only your own representatives, your own parliament. There's a parallel state going on in the world, which comprises of all these entities, as I mentioned. They have so much overwhelming power over democratically elected governments. For example, if you remember farm protests, you remember CAA, NRC protests. Do you remember? Do you remember what was happening in JNU? What was happening after CAA was ratified by Parliament? How is it happening? Who is funding these riots, these protests? Does anyone here want to go and protest or pelt stones outside? Nobody. Most people don't want to participate in violence, but there is an ecosystem which can mobilize people, which can mobilize youth to go to the streets and pelt stones. That's what was happening in Kashmir. That's what was happening after CAA. That's what was happening JNU's that Tugde episode. So when you understand all these processes, you understand how these different phenomena are built and mobilized. You understand that even though you have a democratically elected government in control, you are not really in control of everything. That's what was allowed to happen in Kashmir. And not many, but some of the elements which are linked to the super state benefited from this because it helped them. It helped them to fulfill their own interests, self-interest. But August 5th, 2019, that's when this country decided no more of it. That we are going to change the course of history in Kashmir, and that has changed. I can say that very confidently today. Why do I say that? I am a storyteller, so I'm going to tell you a story. This August 15th, I was in Kashmir and I celebrated Independence Day after 35 years in Kashmir. After 35 years. This was unthinkable before 2019. Unthinkable. Now, on that particular day, I decided that I would go and see if other parts of Kashmir were also in a celebratory mood. As I had noticed in Srinagar on that particular day, I had actually rubbed my eyes in disbelief when I saw long queues of people, common people. Some of them, of course, were government servants. They were standing outside the Bakshi Stadium in Srinagar for celebrations of Indian Independence Day. You remember what you saw for 30 years. You saw Pakistani flags. You saw black flags in Kashmir on August 15th. You saw even ISIS flags in Kashmir on television. But this August 15th, I saw the tricolor everywhere. I saw the children of Kashmiri Muslim martyrs. Kashmiri Muslim martyrs. Never forget this. Many people, on television shows, television debates, would like to project reality in black and white terms. It's not black and white. Many people would say that all of Kashmir was rotten, that all Kashmiri Muslims were traitors, that all Kashmiri Muslims are terrorists. This is again a narrative which has benefited that conflict industry, by the way. So don't fall in this trap. It's a trap when people tell you that all Kashmiri Muslims are terrorists. Don't believe it. Because there were people in Jammu and Kashmir police, there were people, Kashmiri Muslims in Indian Army, in Indian BSF, CRPF, other paramilitary forces, who fought for India even in the last 30 years. So I saw the children of Kashmiri Muslim martyrs in Srinagar that day raising the Indian flag. 10-year-old, 5-year-old. I celebrated Independence Day with them. So I thought that, okay, let me go and see other parts of Kashmir, whether maybe this is all stage managed, maybe this is all managed by the government. Let me go around. So I went South Kashmir to my home district, that's Anantnag. And I went to a restaurant. And in that restaurant, my siblings and we were having lunch, and suddenly a group of young men came and they sat on the adjacent table. After a while, they started conversing in Kashmiri, obviously, and suddenly they started humming Vande Mataram. This was like a moment of reckoning for me. That despite so much trauma, that despite the fact that this particular generation in Kashmir has seen only violence, has not seen coexistence, they are singing Vande Mataram of A.R. Rahman. So keep that in mind, that violence can make people self-censor themselves. If there's a gun held at your head, you may not express yourself the way you think. That fear can gag you. And that's what happened in Kashmir. It gagged people who did not really believe in violence. It made people hide. People who wanted to stand up for the nation. It prevented them from crossing that line. When there's a gun held at your head, you will think twice before you cross that line. Same day, I was roaming around and met a family, random family. And this gentleman, his wife, they had come to this picnic spot with their entire family. And they waved at us and we went and we started chatting with them. And I asked him, so I said, how do you feel? Do you see any change, any transformation? And he said, finally we are liberated. This statement, remember, for 30 years, there was a movement for Azadi, for liberation from India. And here's a family who's telling me that we are finally liberated, that we feel free to come here with our children, to sit in the open air and have tea and have food amongst each other. We have no fear. I had not imagined that this would happen in my lifetime, because I had given up. I had actually given up after seeing the violence as a child, as a Kashmiri Pandit, as a journalist when I went back in 2002 after 12 years. I had given up that hope, because the Indian state in many was its own enemy. It was on its own sustaining that conflict, sustaining hatred against itself. It was inflicting wounds upon itself. But today I am hopeful, because let me tell you what really has happened in the last few years since 2019. Let me know if you're bored, because I'll stop when you're bored.
May I just say 2 sentences in between?
Yes.
I'm sure they are not bored, but I wonder whether they were traumatized by the earlier part of Kashmir, so much so that when she says now Kashmir is liberated, you people are sitting there like dumb. I want to use the word dumb. How come you didn't clap when she said what a great thing? August 5, 2019, and now Kashmiris say we are liberated.
Yes.
जून से गई सो हौद से नहीं आएगी.
But I will tell you another story that might wake you up a little. So in 2019, I was there in Kashmir on August 5th. And I've been trained to go out in the most dangerous circumstances as a journalist. All my editors told me that until you go to the ground, you will never understand either history or present or future. So I really took it as a mantra, and I have practiced it day in, day out. So I went out on a couple of days after August 5th, complete lockdown in Kashmir. No internet, no phones, nothing. But I still had to file for the organization that I was working with at the time. I was working with the Times of India. And I went out, I went to Hazrat Bal Shrine. I found this story very insightful, and that's why, in fact, I shared this story with most people. You will understand this story perhaps not today, but in future. So I went to the shrine, and I saw a tall gentleman sitting there. He was sitting all alone. There were hardly any people. It was Eid day. There were people sitting, praying inside the shrine, but there weren't many people outside. So he waved at me and he asked me who I was, and I mentioned my first name. I said, I'm Aarti from Times of India from Delhi. And he said, why don't you sit and let's talk? So I said, sure. So I sat with him, and he was sitting very quiet. I said, so what do you think is going to happen in Kashmir? Mind you, this is just a couple of days after the nullification of 370 and 35A, after the reorganization of the state. And he paused for a moment. He looked far into the distance, and then with lot of confidence he asserted, he said, nothing will happen. And I said, what do you mean nothing will happen? He said, there will be no violence, there will be no revolt. People have accepted the decision. And this was very contrary to what the Western media was writing, what some left-wing media was also writing at that time from Delhi. So it shook me a bit. I wasn't sure because the silence in Kashmir was quite overpowering. It had, I could sense that there was something in the air, but I couldn't really put a finger on it. So out of curiosity, I said, how do you say this with so much confidence that nothing will happen? Because so many people in the Western media, in the mainstream media in Delhi are saying that there's going to be a major violent revolt, that there will be bloodshed. Already National Conference, PDP, Abdullahs and Muftis, they all had threatened violence. They all had claimed that Kashmir will burn. How are you saying this? You're completely contradicting what the politicians, what the media is saying. So he said, listen, we tried to transform these people in Kashmir for 700 years. So this was again a shock to me. What does he mean? We tried to transform Kashmiri people for 700 years. And he said, but they haven't changed. So I said, what does that mean? They haven't changed. What did you do? He said, we tried to give them deen. Meaning, we tried to give them Islam. We tried to give them faith. But they have not stood up for faith. They have not stood up for Islam in Kashmir. And that's why nothing will happen here. Do you understand what it means? Does anyone understand what it means? He basically was saying that this land of Kashyap, as you said at the outset, this land of Kashyap, which is the fountainhead of Indian civilization or Indic civilization, we tried to convert it to Islam mentally, emotionally, psychologically, in every which way. But these people have betrayed that. They are not standing up for what we brought from outside to Kashmir, this whole version of Islam that they had brought to Kashmir. They haven't really converted. They are still the same Kashmiri Pandits. This is what he told me. That this is... So he said they are the same Kashmiri Pandits who they were 700 years ago. We tried our best, but we have failed. So they are not going to change because they believe in the organic, their original way of life. That Islam has not changed their mentality. So nothing will happen. I walked out from the shrine. I knew that he had summed up the entire history of this nation, starting from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. In one line, he had very succinctly told me the truth nobody had told me till that day. That's why I'm saying don't fall in the trap. When people say that all of them were instrumental in terrorism, all of them were part of terror, all of them were responsible for ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Hindus. Not all. Most, in fact, people in Kashmir, like any other part of this country, would not like violence or such disruption in their lives. Most people would like normal life. Most people would like to see their children going to engineering colleges, doing civil services. In fact, most of the upper middle class and the middle class children from Kashmir studied across the country in the last 30 years. They went to engineering colleges. Most, in fact, came to Pune. There are many colleges here where you will see Kashmiri Muslim, Kashmiri Pandit children. So, what am I trying to say? I'm saying a lot has changed in the last few years since 2019. And what has changed? One major change, that Kashmiri Muslims, who were projected as the anti-national community in this country, by and large, the majority are not anti-national. That's what I'm telling you. Lot of people may not like it. Who were the anti-nationals? The elite class, the ruling elite class of Kashmir, who kept everyone hostage through their communal politics, through their, as I said, the lucrative conflict industry. The Abdullahs, the Muftis, the National Conference, the PDP, and all the ruling class of Kashmir, which kept telling lies to their people that 370 cannot be abolished, cannot be removed, cannot be nullified, that Jammu and Kashmir is a special status, state, that Jammu and Kashmir has a distinct identity, it is not Indian. Those were all lies. Those were fed to people with a certain objective. And that objective has been today, in a way, defeated. Apart from this, what has happened? You now compare the situation of security in Jammu and Kashmir, and I'm giving you some data points here. You can check it out yourself, but I want, for the purposes of your civil services exams, I want you to pay attention. Compared to 3-year data from 2016 to 2019, and then compare it with 3 years data of 2019 till 2022. Terror attacks reduced by 32%. Killings reduced by 14%. 52% reduction in the killings of security forces. 14% reduction in terror recruitment. This is, I'm comparing 3-year data sets before 2019 and after 2019. Now, it's only 3 years. Let's take a bigger time period. Compare 7-year data from 2006 to 2013 and then 2014 to 2021. 7-year data. 60% reduction in terrorism. 42% reduction in infiltration. 94% reduction in street violence and rioting in Kashmir. 94%. And 70% reduction in the killings of security forces. So these are tangible objectives which have been achieved. Let's come to tourism and economy. So, as I said, remember I mentioned New York Times reporter who had come and who saw a serious difference between Kashmir and other world conflict zones. Before 2019, we had a conflict industry. Despite the fact we had no tourism, we had negligible tourism in Kashmir, but everyone had a bungalow. We had mansions, we had cars, we had unimaginable wealth in Kashmir. How did that happen? There was no tourism. Kashmir has very few industries, handicrafts, agriculture, horticulture. All of it suffered through the 30-year period. In horticulture, Himachal Pradesh took the lead and in fact left Kashmir behind. Their horticulture produce became quite popular and available across the country. Kashmir was hardly selling anything. Handicrafts, yes, but still not a huge industry, because over the years across the country we have seen that lesser and lesser number of people want to be in handicrafts. They don't want to, families which have been doing handicrafts traditionally, their children don't want to do handicrafts. So what was happening? Where was this money coming from? It was not coming through economy. The center used to send, most of the economy was run on the central funds. 90% funds were used to go from center to Jammu and Kashmir, and Jammu and Kashmir was only consuming those funds. There was hardly any revenue generation. Now, in 2022, in the first 6 months, about 80 lakh tourists visited Jammu and Kashmir. 80 lakh. And in just May alone, just 1 month, 22 lakh tourists visited Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, in the whole year, 1.8 crore tourists visited Jammu and Kashmir. A state which was blocked, which was completely impenetrable. Nobody wanted to go to Jammu and Kashmir. Nobody wanted to go to Kashmir. But suddenly you see now you have night flights to Srinagar. I recently saw young men and women camping in the hilly resorts of the valley. So that is a major shift from the conflict industry which sustained Kashmir, which made Kashmir wealthy, but at what expense? At the expense of Kashmiri Hindus who still are homeless, ethnically cleansed, at the expense of Kashmiri Muslims who were killed by terrorists. The media never told you that 40,000 Kashmiri Muslims were killed by terrorists. All you heard was like Kashmiri Muslims who were killed by security forces. They are in hundreds. So that shift has happened. And instead of that conflict industry economy, you now have a proper mainstream economy. Tourism, hotel management. You have people, in fact, building startups. There are hundreds of startups coming out of Jammu and Kashmir. And I am the first woman entrepreneur, startup owner as a woman in digital media. This is my story. This is Jammu and Kashmir's story. This can be anybody's story in India today. That we all can, come from the bottom and we can all rise to the top. If decision makers among you tomorrow take the right decisions. So that's the difference that we have made in the last few years. One more aspect. Many people in this country still sort of say that Jammu and Kashmir is doing fine since 2019, but there is no democracy. There are no elections in Jammu and Kashmir. But do you know what has happened since 2019? Real democracy has actually come to Jammu and Kashmir, because the Panchayati Raj Act was amended, District Development Council was created, and in November 2018, elections were held in 9 phases without any violence, with a 74% polling. If all of them wanted Azadi, if all of them wanted Pakistan or Ummah or Khalifat, Who are these people who are voting? In 2019, for the first time in the history of Jammu and Kashmir, Block Development Council elections were held without any violence and with 98% voter turnout. So what has happened? What has been happening in Jammu and Kashmir? Why haven't we looked at Jammu and Kashmir through this prism? That's why this question, I like that Dharmadhikari ji left it unspecified before and after. He let me choose. But he did the right thing by not specifying it, because I can tell you with certainty that finally this government, Prime Minister Modi's government, has done something which will shape the course of history not only in Kashmir but the rest of India too. Because I have always said the environment of hatred and bigotry and conflict, whether it's in Kashmir, whether it's in any part of the country, it will affect the psyche of the whole nation. We are one nation, never forget this. We are one people, never forget this. Anyone telling you that this community, that community is enemy is telling you the untruth. Now, coming to my own community, I do feel that this remains the biggest unresolved question. But I still see a ray of hope. Because after 35 years, the government has finally reopened the case of Neelkant Ganju, who was a judge who had given death sentence to Maqbool Butt, the founder of JKLF, the banned terror organization. Neelkant Ganju was killed by terrorists, and for 35 years, imagine that. This system, this country, this nation did not have the spine, did not have the courage to convict the murderers. This is why I keep repeating that the bureaucracy, that the leadership, the onus is on them. The onus will be on you for the decisions that you take tomorrow. If you take the path which is just the opposite of the righteousness, if you take the path of adharma, you may think that you are benefiting today. You may think that you are making your life pretty good today. But this civilization, this nation, the future, your children, your grandchildren, the posterity will not forgive you. As I don't forgive the people who were responsible for my exodus, who were responsible for the ethnic cleansing of my community. I refuse to forgive them. This long spiel that I gave with one quote. It was written by Kalhana, the author of Raj Tarangani. Raj Tarangani is perhaps the only documented history in the entire subcontinent which documents 5,000 years of history of Kashmiri Hindus. He says, through his fingers glided the years, months, weeks, and days, returning again and again without end, as in the cycle of existence. For me, this quote is very meaningful because when we talk about before and after, whether it's 370, whether it's 1947, whether it's 2019. We must remember the cycle of existence is such that things repeat themselves. History repeats itself. The key here is the path of dharma will return. Will return when, as you know, you all may have read Mahabharata, and as we say that when there's too much saturation of evil, finally the Lord will come. And I say the key for ending the cycle of evil is with you, is with him, is with her. Because you are the future of this nation. You will decide the direction in which we will enter the next century. And I believe that this century and the next and all the centuries ahead belong to India. So break the cycle of adharma, stand up for dharma. Thank you.
So after ma'am's enlightening talk, the floor is now open for any questions. I have already received a few of them, so I will set the ball rolling, and after that point, anyone who has a question may please raise their hands. So the first question that I have received over here is the controversy surrounding the delimitation of Jammu Kashmir. How far is it true that earlier regime had gamed the system, the electorate, in such a way that it would always be the Srinagar Valley and the Muslims who would end up deciding the elections, and whether that should or has changed by now?
Good question. The only demographic change that happened in Jammu and Kashmir in the last 75 years was in Kashmir. And what was that demographic change? That an indigenous minority was driven out. So what happened to our votes? What happened to our fundamental right to vote, to choose our representatives, to have our voice in the assembly or in parliament? We did not have it. So just imagine when you have 300,000 people overnight driven out, and now Kashmir Valley is completely homogeneous with a Muslim majority. Most of these people went to Jammu region, and therefore Jammu region's voting demographic changed, because now you had the influx of internally displaced people. Not only that, when terror erupted in Kashmir in 1990s, this was one phase of change in demographics. Then there was another one. In the upper reaches of Jammu region, terror groups started striking on the Hindu minorities in Doda, in Poonch, in Rajouri. They also migrated to Jammu. If I don't know how many of you remember, there was also this, it was in the news, Rohingyas, who had no connection to Jammu and Kashmir whatsoever. And they were brought in by touts, by political touts, to Jammu region. So they were an additional constituency in Jammu, because many of them got Aadhaar cards. If you get an Aadhaar card, you also can get a voter card. Nothing prohibits you. So for many people who were opposed to basically delimitation, and many people also who thought that this was a fair game to wipe out voters from Kashmir and add additional voters in Jammu, and they would not have proportionate representation, was absurd. But it was going on. So that in fact was supposed to get corrected by Delimitation Commission. However, what has happened, even as many people have sort of accepted the Delimitation Commission's new formula and they have added some seats in Jammu and one seat in Kashmir. What has happened is that many people still remain disenfranchised. I'll give an example. My sister was married to a non-state subject, got disqualified earlier. In fact, till 2002 this rule was in place because of 35A that women used to get disqualified. National Conference and PDP tried several times to in fact change a verdict, a High Court verdict that had come around 2002, which basically said that this was gender discriminatory, it should not happen. So the verdict was in place, and therefore women like me who married outside state subject were able to retain that right. But the children of couples or women who had married outside the state still did not have the right. So children of women, and as you know, ethnic cleansing pushed our entire community to the wall. Many of our women married outside the community. Our children still did not have the right, and unfortunately Delimitation Commission did not take them into account. This is an example. Similarly, there is another grouse that Delimitation Commission did not wait for the new census in Jammu and Kashmir. The previous census obviously, could not in fact take into account the displaced Kashmiri Pandits who are scattered across the country and outside the country. So our population numbers are all disputed. Nobody can really say with authenticity that we are 300,000 or 400,000. Might as well be 700,000, but we can't really say with certainty because there is no proper census of Kashmiri Pandits who are displaced. So the commission did not take these things in account. I think some people also made petitions, but we can only hope that in future there will be a course correction and there will be proportionate representation for all communities who've been displaced. Now, there's one additional thing. I'm extremely hopeful that things will get only better from here, because the Government of India recently nominated 2 Kashmiri Pandits for Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly. So, despite the fact that we haven't returned to the valley, we have not been rehabilitated, we haven't our ethnic cleansing has not been acknowledged. Our, in fact, case has been dismissed repeatedly by the Supreme Court. They don't even want to touch it. They don't want to basically open the cases. But I'm hopeful because simultaneously government is making efforts. One is, of course, the nomination. Second, as I pointed out, Neelkant Ganju's case has been reopened, which will lead to eventually truth and reconciliation. We will find out the murderers. There will be convictions. In fact, Yasin Malik, if you remember, he is in jail and most likely he will get the punishment that he deserves. So I'm not pessimistic about this. I think we are, in many areas, we're still sort of not able to resolve issues. We're not able to find solutions. But I see a roadmap. And I think it's important to have a roadmap, it's important to have the intention, it's important to have will. We might of course have obstacles, which I think it's responsibility of the entire nation to come together and force the government to take the right steps.
Yeah. Rishikesh.
And my question to you is that today or tomorrow we have to give status of the state to the Jammu and Kashmir. Now it is the Union Territory. So the elite class of Kashmir, like the Muftis and the Abdullahs, they have actually they are the culprits for whatever was happening in Kashmir. So don't you think again it would reflect, these things would reflect again, because if they would come in power, then because of the Muslim majority.
So, well, it's certain that there will be elections in Jammu and Kashmir. India is a democracy. We are not turning into a dictatorship, I'm sure, now or in future. So, after elections, it's to be seen who really comes to power. As I pointed out, 98% people turned up for elections in the Block Development Council polls. Who were these people? They did not, necessarily support Abdullahs or Muftis. But at the same time, you're right that if the power goes back to Abdullahs or Muftis, but then we are a democracy. It's entirely up to people whom they bring to power. If they bring them back to power, then a lot will also depend on what these political parties, the National Conference or the PDP, what line they take. As of today, they are on the same old rhetoric that they used to play. They haven't changed, they haven't transformed, they are resistant to change, they are not able to reconcile that people have changed, that people have accepted the transformation. So, but let's leave this to our democratic process in India and of course J&K as well. Okay, let's go up there.
Do you have any picture or
Kaustubh Dada.
that should be addressed to government that should be solved or
Yes, the government can do a couple of things. One, it is important to dismantle the entire network that sustained the conflict industry in Kashmir. It's very important. There are key players who held J&K hostage for all these decades. The government needs to, it's all right to basically catch the smaller fish, the pawns. It's okay to arrest or ban organizations. But the mastermind, the key figures who ran this whole industry, they need to be tried as well. They need to be prosecuted as well. I think that's very important. Second, for the return and rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits, I think the government needs to show a clear roadmap. The government so far has shown signs that it does think that the return and rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits is vital to not just the social fabric of Kashmir, but it's vital for long sustainable peace in Jammu and Kashmir and also for our own geopolitical strategic interests. But we haven't seen sufficient measures yet. It's important that the land that Kashmiri Pandits lost in the last 30 years. Most Kashmiri Pandits had to sell their land, their homes for peanuts, which is defined as distress sale. The government, of course, has set up an initiative. It has invited Kashmiri Pandits to submit complaints about distress sale. In fact, they want to reverse it. But we see lot of impediments to that. We see that lot of Kashmiri Muslim, Kashmiri, even some Kashmiri Pandits for their, I don't know, respective compulsions were, you can say, blackmailed into selling crucial land to the land mafia in Kashmir. And this land mafia again is connected to terror network. The whole network was not only funded by drugs, but it was also funded by the real estate mafia. So many key players who were facilitating this basically in a way transferring of land of Kashmiri Pandits to the separatists or to some elements in Kashmir, that needs to be tackled well. We haven't seen much success there yet. So I think that's another thing. Then, of course, I would say that the rest of the country will have to take initiatives to invest in Kashmir. They will have to take initiatives to normalize Kashmir. It's not only upon the government. We are, after all, a thriving economy. We have a thriving private sector. Why should it be only upon the government to do things in Kashmir? Why shouldn't private sector come and invest in Kashmir? So those three things are necessary, I think.
I want the last question by some girl.
Yes.
She had raised hand here. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Actually, I had two questions. First one was that, as you said, that the whole country has to take an initiative to invest in Kashmir. And previously, like before the amendment of the constitution, other citizens of the country were not allowed to buy property or any land in Kashmir. And now, as it is amended, we do have opportunities. But do you think that people will be hesitant to buy any asset there, because there is always a risk of
So good question. That's the only question, right?
No, I had another one.
Okay, forget it. No, I think this is a big enough question. So when you say there's always a risk, this is a perception. This is an idea that has been fed into our minds for 30 years by that conflict industry, that there's a risk. When we have fundamentally altered the environment, we have fundamentally altered the legislation. Why should we have this idea in our mind that there will be a risk? That risk is also possible in Uttar Pradesh. That risk is also possible in, say, Hyderabad, or in Assam, or in any other state of India. No? But we have normalized this idea that there's a risk that Pakistan will continue to do what it does, which it will. But we as a nation, shouldn't we have the spine to take that risk? Shouldn't we encourage everyone to take that risk? How long will we be fearful, afraid that the enemy across the border is going to send terrorists, is going to disrupt the peace? How long will we do that? Tomorrow you may have another front. We had major insurgency in Punjab. We have had conflicts in Northeast. We have had, even inside the mainland, we have had red terror belt. We have had Maoist violence. So are we going to be fearful? Are we going to always say, oh, there's a risk, so we should not go to Chhattisgarh, we should not invest in Madhya Pradesh, we should not invest in Northeast, we should not invest in Kashmir, our kids should not go there? The nation has to decide, are we going to let the enemy win by inducing this fear in our minds? We have to get rid of this fear. That's the only solution.
Our family member, Aarti ji, Chanakya Mandal Pariwar member, I am calling her. She is part of our family.
That's an honor.
Yeah. Good Marathi word is Tai. And of course, my dear friends, you know I'm here just to, I'm not even going to call this summing up because there is no summing up. Our understanding of Kashmir issue has just begun. And our association with Aarti ji also has just begun.
Thank you.
I look forward to continued association for the rest of life.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
an honor.
Yeah. So here is a standing invitation, and as Akshay ji scolds me, I will make it a point to also send a formal invitation that do keep visiting Chanakya Mandal.
Yes, indeed.
I can assure you that there will be Chanakya Mandal students working in Kashmir. I'm happy to say they are already there, some of them, but many more will join, and maybe she will purchase a piece of land. The region I recommend to you is called Habba Kadal in Srinagar.
Yes.
Larger part of last 2 hours, I may be physically sitting there, but I was actually on the banks of Dal Lake. And with actually lot of pleasant memories, but many, if not most of them, deeply painful memories. I would urge all of you to follow Aarti ji on YouTube also, on Facebook and Twitter, so you remain in touch with the issue. And of course, her fearless expression. I must also bring to your notice one about 1.5 hour talk where she tells the horrible experience of how she and her family was required to leave Anantnag. It is our story, everyone's story. I must also tell you that January 19, 1990 is actually so deeply even personal to me, I am telling you. Therefore, I want it to be personal for all of you. It is not only Kashmiri Pandits. I have never forgotten that day. On that particular day, I happened to be still in the service, so there are conduct rules and limitations on what you can talk. But I have never forgotten January 19, 1990. So until the day Pandits go back to Valley, rest of India also should not rest in peace. I just want to say last 2 things. There are a lot of things I was listening and taking down notes, but one has to pay attention to the watch, however keen you people are to listen. Baba Saheb Ambedkar was diehard against Article 370. The great man. He opposed Article 370 so much so that he in fact refused to draft it, mind you. So Nehru got Gopal Swami Iyengar, one of his trusted lieutenants, to draft the bill. Ambedkar was so against Article 370 that he remained absent in the Constituent Assembly on the day Article 370 was finally to be discussed and approved. And when it went through, Ambedkar is on record having said that the country will rue the day, live to rue the day this is passed. That sad historical cycle is overturned on August 5, 2019, mind you. There is still a lot to be done. Lot to be done at government level, lot to be done at our level also. So on one side, may our study continue and our commitment to Kashmir continue. I repeat, please remember, it is deepest in my heart, even at the involvement and feeling level, that it's that personal. It's that, and it should be personal for all of us. Aarti ji told us about actually the essential loyalty of Kashmiris to Indian civilization. In fact, even the drafting of this sentence is not okay, because you say loyalty of Kashmiris to Indian civilization. There is two-ness. There is no two-ness in being Kashmiri and being Bharatiya. There is Advaita, the oneness, so there is no two-ness. She shared some of the examples. While closing, I thought I will just tell you just two small pieces of data. When Jinnah wanted Kashmir to join Pakistan, and he made lots of offers to Maharaja Hari Singh, including an offer for autonomy, blah, 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 he sent in parts of Pakistani army in mufti, civil dress. First intimation of this Pakistani invasion was actually given by a 14-year-old boy named Salim Sherwani. So Kashmir's connection with India is not necessarily based on that religion in the sense that Kashmiris are not anti-Indian because they happen to be Muslims. Or some of you may also remember that Kargil is a failure of our military intelligence initially, because Pakistan had occupied Indian parts of the summits by like January, February 1999, and how we came to know is thanks to another young Charwaha boy there behind the Dras summit that was captured by Pakistanis. He saw 5 unknown people walking. He went, he asked them, who are you? And they asked him his name. That happened to be Muslim. So they said कि बेटा हम मुसलमान तुम भी मुसलमान तो हिंदुस्तान की सरकार को मदद मत करना. That boy nodded with his rustic rural common sense. And when these 5 people vanished from his eyesight, he ran. First thing he did is to come to Dras cantonment and inform our army that infiltrators have come in. So actually, there has never been a question, a doubt about Kashmiris being Bharatiya. But like she explained, 370, these painful provisions of Article 35A, etc., resulted in Kashmir bleeding. Maybe that bleeding has just stopped, but lot of development is to take place. All I am going to say as we now close our eyes to pray is it is our commitment to understand the situation. It is our commitment also to work in our own way, whatever smaller, bigger way, our own way to continue. And those of us who become lucky enough to clear, say, UPSC. By the way, I want to save time, but I am interested in knowing later on, whoever is this bureaucrat who bragged to you that he brought human rights to India. Later on.
Later.
Yeah. Can't be Harsh Mandar, huh?
No.
Yeah. Also, the lady, New York Times journalist who covered in India's favor.
It was not necessarily in India's favor, but she was baffled that how could this conflict zone be so wealthy while other conflict zones which were controlled by the US were in shambles, had nothing to eat, for example in Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
So she could not figure out the phenomenon.
Yeah.
So not necessarily
Yeah.
pro-Indian, but she was truthful to
Yeah,
her profession.
We unfortunately happen to know some Indian sounding names who are there, but lobbying on Washington DC Hill against India. Actually, when we were discussing before we came here, Aarti ji narrated that story. I hope you people, I'm going to have to be so brief. I'm sorry, I'm actually taking this minute, but I don't want to make this one sentence. The Hazrat Bal around 5th of August 2019, and she was discussing with a person there who said for 700 years we tried to change these people, but they haven't changed. How I wish this sentence was true for only one family which goes in the name of Nehru. So, my dear friends, at the mental level, psychological level, and at the level of heart, including our studies, let our commitment to Kashmir be strengthened. I mean it when I say that our relationship and association with Aarti ji, I look forward to it being lifelong. We have our friend sitting here, Akshay ji, Akshay Bakaya, who I'm deeply thankful to him also. And he is also like as much now Chanakya Mandal Pariwar member. After spending his richly, deeply experienced professional life in Paris, he has finally settled in Pune. And so I am very happy we are closely associated with each other. We look forward to the journey together. May our resolve and our commitment for Kashmir be strengthened over here as we now close our eyes to say the prayer.
नव्या वैभवाचीच स्वप्ने सजावी
All the best.